Welcome to the Culture of You, meaningful dialogue with me and my favorite people. All right, everyone, welcome to the Culture of You. Today I have the honor of having the man, the myth, the mayor, librarian, writer, Emmy Award-winning poet, producer, director, as I said, the unofficial mayor of Columbus, founder of Streetlight Guild, a performance arts and culture center for Columbus, mentor, giver of free advice. That was one of my favorite ones. Giver of free advice and opinions. He is also the founder of Holler, Rhapsody and Refrain, which begins up by the time this airs. We will probably be right in the middle of Rhapsody and Refrain. Is this 2 or 3?
This is 3.
Okay, this is 3. I was a part of 1, 2.
Mhm.
Yep. Okay. And 30 days of some dope culture, poetry, music, all that kind of stuff. An award-winning journalist, also like curator of musical spaces. We can call them ancestral and sacred musical spaces because there's some really cool things being created within the community. And, with the likes of like Dr. Mark Lomax and Phil Maneri. So lover of Prince, horror movies, and quality barbecue. Today I'm here with Scott Woods. Thank you so much for being here with me. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I am truly and genuinely honored.
That's so nice. Normally I ask people why they're here, but like I don't know if people know this, so I want to give them this information and give you again in this theme of giving you your flowers while you're here. I had my first poetry book, and Scott opened up the doors of the Streetlight Guild for me to have my launch, which was a booming success. And the start of me being like, all right, I'm going to produce some things in the city. Um, Also, Rhapsody and Refrain gave me a chance there to come and showcase some poetry and musical talent. But um, why did you say yes to this space?
Oh, well, you talk to people that I probably don't talk to. And so that's been my experience. And so any
Okay.
chance that you and I, who care about each other and who respect each other, gets to kind of cross pollinate that audience, I'm here for.
And I think the first example we had of that was you coming to Leadership Columbus and giving a talk when the mayor couldn't come, and we joked about that. But now, like they're like, we're gonna keep bringing Scott Woods back.
I done took that man's job.
Oh, we gave him a video. He got some time. He's all right. He's got plenty to do. So like we were like, we'll get
Sure.
a welcome video from him and we'll get Scott to come in because they really, really loved your message. And I love that you got to be with that audience.
Well, I appreciate that. And I always have a good time talking with them very specifically.
hmm Yeah, there are future leaders. So the hope is that they can see the world a little differently for sure. All right. So my first question for you is, how would you describe your vibe personally and professionally, if they're different? I doubt they're different for you. But how would you describe your vibe?
So I think they are different and they need to be. um, so professionally, you know, um, I have my day job as a librarian, but then I also have all the other stuff, the
Mhm,
writing, the running of nonprofits. That vibe, I would say, is very much about um, being as laid back as possible while getting as much work accomplished as possible, right?
mhm,
I'm not big on stress. And so I will get out of something or I will cut something off or I will quit something when that thing becomes like a burden. I got enough
mhm,
to do without the burden. So I tend to be very laid back professionally.
mhm,
Personally, I'm a bit of an introvert, right? I like my house. I like all my things, right?
mhm,
So I'm a bit of an introvert. And I look like I get out a lot, and I guess I do, but they're not like the typical get out stuff, right? Like
mhm.
oh, Scott went to the bar, Scott went to the party. Like that's not really my vibe.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this in the sense, I definitely have a public persona, public vibe. And you're saying you're an introvert. I have yet to believe that. But tell me about your process. Tell me about your process with that. Like, I don't when are you home? When do you get to be by yourself?
Well, I will tell you, much of what people perceive about me, while those things are true, it is not honest, right?
Mm,
I am very much an example of what of reality versus online presence, which is how most people judge those things, right?
mhm,
You know, how often are you online? How much are you online? What do you put online? How many platforms are you on? How many followers do you got on each platform? Like I do pretty good at that, considering I don't do that. Like I don't want to say I don't do much, but I don't pour into that. I don't
mhm,
do that. I pour into the work that I do,
mhm,
and I let that turn all the other stuff into whatever it's going to turn it into. So, for instance, I do probably, you know, twice as many commitments and events as the average person in a given, let's say, month, right?
mhm.
And when you do that much work, um, it just kind of all translates. It all kind of bleeds out into, your marketing and the way that people perceive you and what you post and stuff like that. So I don't do almost any personal posting whatsoever, right?
Mhm, mhm.
All of my stuff is basically either related to work that I'm doing or ideas that I have.
Yeah.
And then there's obviously a third part of that, which is like my activism, right?
Mhm.
So the things that I care about, that I write about, that I plan around, all of that. So, um, but much of that, frankly, is I would say about 50% of that is work I can do by myself, right?
Nice.
Which was a lesson that I had to learn many, many years ago to get anything done.
I think this is a great question as like because my social media has turned into that, right? Like has turned into the work. And then, I mean, maybe when I was on Twitter, you might get like a snarky thought, but really a lot of the places where I could do the honest, authentic engagement or like humor was in those comedy spaces when I'm like doing improv poetry or like improv comedy and I can talk about all the current events and things that are happening, but then it's just like you just share that, right? And so you can get caught up in that. And you had a really interesting live the other day that I did share that was talking about leaving room for your wins.
Yes,
And I loved that. Can you talk a little bit about what that means in this moment for you?
absolutely, because I'm still unpacking that, right? So traditionally, um, and my reputation remains centered around this notion of a like a 24/7 work ethic,
Mhm.
which is not my work ethic, right? Like if I worked nearly as much as people think I do, I would be rich. I wouldn't know any of these people, right? So
Same.
but I was killing myself prior to the pandemic. I was pretty much just like planning things, running things, doing things, writing things. And Streetlight Guild was open like 4 days a week kind of
Yeah.
situation. And every day was different. So I had to be there for everything. And it was just like, and I was just constantly just doing something all the time. And they would be really dope things, right? They would be these wins, these awesome wins. And and that, and the drive to do that, the hustle, so to speak, um, really, like, some of that is necessary to get it off the ground. But once you've kind of done a bunch of things, then you have, in my experience, I had to like reinterrogate what I was doing and why I was doing it. And I
Mhm.
struggled to do that. I wanted to do that, but then the pandemic made me do that.
Yeah.
Right? The pandemic said, "Look, you can't do none of these things unless it's at the crib. So what you gonna do? Who are you without those things?"
Mhm.
And that was of course, the world was on fire. It was a horrible experience all around. That said, the bubble that I was in was pretty sweet, right? Like I got to just like chill. I
Mhm.
got to sit down. I got to read books. I got to watch movies. I got to do stuff at home. And that was like, that sounds very simple, but it's extremely mind blowing if your schedule, if you got like, some wild schedule. So
Mhm.
the pandemic made me like peel that all the way down. There was some work that I did, like all my writing picked up, right?
Right.
Um, but then too, I had to like confront some serious truths as an artist, right? As a writer,
Mm.
because I was doing all this professional writing, all these journals. I was doing like 3 columns a week for a while there, nationally and locally,
Mhm.
and and that was cool, right? Like again, I love to write, so that's not really an issue per se. But none of it was the writing that I was put here to do. It was not the books, right? I got books over here. I got 5 stacks, of books
Mhm.
that are in various stages of progress. And the thing that the pandemic told me was you're still not doing that. You're still not in that space. You're still doing something other than those things.
Mhm.
And some of that was money, right? Like, you get paid good money to write that much.
Yep.
And that was helpful, right, during the pandemic, obviously, for lots of
Right.
reasons. But at some point I'm like, yo, like I don't write for money, right? Like I write because I love to write, because I have things to say, and I feel like the things that I say largely are unique things.
Mhm.
And so really that's where I thrive. If I'm not writing for a long period of time, I turn into another Scott entirely,
Wow.
right? A very unpleasant Scott. And I discovered during the pandemic that I for whatever reason, I was not getting to the books. I still
Mm.
wasn't getting to the book, even with all this extra time, right?
Right.
And so I had to do a deeper dive and a deeper dive and a deeper dive. And so now, with things being the way they are, I would say in the last year or so,
Mhm.
being able to reopen my business, Street Like Guild, being able to kind of start doing gigs and stuff like that. I picked that back up, obviously, but I did so much less,
Mhm.
right? Like I was like, okay, I'm not going to be open 4 days a week. I'm going to be open one day a week.
Right.
We're going to like make people come on the one day. They're going to
Mhm.
have to, that's the day, right? Unless we have a special event, that's the day. And if you
Mhm.
want to meet with me, that's the day. If you want to catch me face to face, that's the day. I hate taking coffee meetings, right? So, um, and that's worked out really well, right? It started to, I'm easing into the version of me and the version of my work that I want to do.
Mhm.
The one that doesn't kill me. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, if you look at the schedule for, not just me, but for Streetlight Guild, like, it's very different, right? There's like, there's fewer things, but higher impacts.
Ooh.
And so, which is the goal, right? Like,
Mhm.
and so that's working. There's going to be even more of that come next year.
Mhm.
Um, and I've tried to make my personal schedule, way looser and freer than it's ever been, or at least as long in many years.
Mhm.
Probably in the last, I don't know, 8 or 9 years, I've never had a schedule this light, right? Which is a trip. But I'm not even really answering your question. I feel like I'm just setting up the answer to your question. So the answer to your question is to speak to letting your winds breathe.
Mhm.
I was doing, a lot of the stuff that I do is really amazing stuff. Not to me, but to other people. I mean, it is to me too, but also
Okay.
to other people. And so I'm like, yo, this cool thing happened. This cool thing happened. This cool thing happened. And in the past, that would be the case because I was making them happen,
Mhm.
right? I was constantly like pushing and driving and making and producing a thing and creating a thing. And look, here's my schedule for the next 3 months, and it's completely packed with all these things that I'm producing and creating.
Mhm.
And I would never get an opportunity to just sit with the win, right? Would sit with the result of it, sit with
Mhm.
the lessons in it,
Mhm.
sit with the impact, not to reflect on it, right? I just would just be on to the next thing, on to the next thing. And it's very difficult. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult to build on sand.
Yeah.
And if you turn your winds into sand, then they become less of a win. they become a
Mhm,
detriment, really, right? So,
mhm,
so for me, I said, look, I have to break up my schedule. I had to start saying no.
mhm,
I had to start believing that my ideas deserve more attention and focus.
mhm,
There isn't one thing that I've done as an as a creative person, whether that's writing, whether that's playing music, whether that's art, whether that's producing events. There's not one thing that I've done that wouldn't have been better if I just did it slower or took just another little bit of time to it,
mm,
and I'm talking about some really dope stuff, right?
right.
Um, like I did Holler, like I designed Holler back in 2000. It happened in 2017, but it was being developed, for about 4 months in front of that.
Mhm,
No one should be able to put on 31 straight days of events in 4 months. That just shouldn't happen.
right.
Um, it, but at great cost.
Mm,
And so when it happened, like I did that whole series of shows with a pinched nerve, like that whole month. And then like when it was over, like I was almost ready to hit the next thing pretty quick. And I'm like, yo, you just did 31 shows. Will you just and
sit
I just
down.
couldn't turn it down, couldn't sit down,
Mhm,
you know.
mhm,
And so only recently have I discovered the importance of letting those winds breathe, right? Leaving some space in there, saying no. No is your friend, right?
mhm,
So just being like, yeah, nah, not now, not right now. This is not the season for that. Check with me in 2 months, 3 months,
mhm.
whatever, blah, blah, blah. And you don't, as an artist and as someone who does lots of things, you always have this lurking fear in the back that if you say no, you won't get the opportunity.
Absolutely.
And that's not really how the world works. If you are actually good at things and you actually have good ideas and you
Right.
actually have work ethic, that's not really how the world works.
But I think there's this like amount of time to get to that space and that confidence and assurance, and probably to some degree financial stability where you can say no and it doesn't like tank your living situation, right? Like, or, whatever you're doing. So there's like some element of building up that platform that is necessary.
To some extent, I think it
Hmm.
depends on what you do, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Like if you want to make your bones as a producer of events, it's in your interest to produce events, right? Um, but if you're like a writer or a musician or what have you, especially with the way the game is set up now, industry wide, like it
Hmm.
may not be in your interest to like just grind, right? Like you may want to let your stuff breathe. Like people are creating amazing art and they post it like once or twice and then it disappears into the ether, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
It's ridiculous, ridiculous. It's maddening, frankly, you know. And then they want to know why they ain't got no gigs.
I
The
mean, and
universe.
oddly enough, I think it was Lauren Hill that said, you have to go live. As an artist, like there also has to be this element of experiencing life, like that's your material, right? And if you don't have that and you're just moving on to the next thing, then there will be some depravity of depth in your work that is not sustainable.
Yeah. And I'm a big fan of growth, right? Like I believe
Hmm.
in staying constantly thirsty for knowledge and
Hmm.
information so that I can apply those things and grow, right? Like I don't
Hmm.
ever feel like I just got something on lock. I mean, like if you ask me about Stephen King's Magical Negroes, yeah, I got that subject on lock, but who cares about that, right? Like if you want to know about events, like you can't be locked up on something like that. You can't be
Hmm.
locked up about writing and art. You have to constantly be open to being surprised. And that's
Hmm.
basically what I'm in. I'm in the moments business, right? Like
Hmm.
I'm not here to just throw a cover band out. I need moments, real human moments to be happening in the spaces that I'm in. Um, or I can't do them.
Hmm.
It isn't interesting to me. And I am at a point in my life where if it doesn't interest me, I don't have to do it.
Yes, that is a wonderful space to be in. And I can definitely say that from being in a space where like people probably didn't know me, and now it's like, oh, like I think they know to the some extent, if they work with me, this is the bar, right? Like this is what is going to be expected, this is what's going to happen. And so it actually makes it easier. The hardest thing is to say no, which ultimately winds up being relief, and it puts things in the right timing. You're doing Rhapsody and Refrain next month as we talk about the hustle, right? So you're doing Rhapsody and Refrain. How has that been different from that original Holler experience to be and have more ease in it?
Oh, well, the easiest thing is that it's all poetry.
Mhm.
Poetry is easy, right?
Right.
Like booking one poet is like a piece of cake.
Mhm.
Booking 30 poets, frankly, is also a piece of cake.
Right.
So, like, yeah, because poets are thirsty.
Mhm.
So they love to get asked to do stuff.
Mhm.
And we're at a place in Columbus where, we only have like one weekly open mic right now.
Yep.
This is, that it's as low as it's ever been, probably ever.
Mhm.
And we've lost, several long-standing open mics. So there aren't really places for people to go do their thing. There's like monthly shows that happen, but those are very different vibes than weekly shows.
Mhm.
Weekly shows is how you learn. Weekly
Right.
shows is where you get to network and you get to go up against, like, not up against, but alongside, like 20, 30 other poets, right?
Mhm.
Um, some of whom will be great, some of whom won't be, but you learn from all of that experience.
Mhm.
And you don't have that right now. We don't, in the city, we don't have that right now.
Mhm.
One mic can't carry that. And so, which is not my call for people to go out and start open mics. That's not what I'm suggesting. I think that kind of thing has to happen organically,
Yeah.
right? Um, but so really, it was very simple. Poetry is easy to book. Like the overhead is low. If
Yep.
it's only one poet, it need not be expensive,
Mhm.
and you can kind of hit your nut, pretty quick in terms of the
Mhm.
audience. To even at $5 a head, depending on what you're paying the poet,
Yep.
So poetry's easy. Like, and if
And
you've
you
got
like
a
have an event space.
yeah, like,
So
if you already got a venue, then it's like real easy. Like you just showing up and opening the door, So,
Mhm.
but that's actually, frankly, that's not the easy part. The easy part is in the asking because people want to do it. They
Mhm.
sorely want to do it, and so many of them are used to not being asked. Number one, and
Mhm.
number two, not being paid. And
Right.
so there's all these like things that should be very common in poetry that are not, and so they want to do it. They love to do it. The previous versions, one live and one online. Those were
Mhm.
great series of events.
Mhm.
Um, and just being attached to the legacy of Columbus poetry is dope,
Mhm.
right? Like you get to become part of history with that. Like
Oh
those
yeah,
are
it's in my
historical
resume.
events.
It's in my
Yeah,
resume.
thank you.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of people out there ain't got it on their bio, and I'm like, you hurting yourself, dog.
Put it
So
in there.
put it on there, man.
Well, what I'm hearing you say is like, you said to be asked and to be paid. So poetry
Yeah,
wise, the bar is in hell, is what I'm hearing. The bar is low.
listen,
It's
listen.
real low.
I mean, look, and I did that for years, right? Like as a poet
Right.
myself, like I did that for many. I went on the road. I was on the road, doing that for a long time. Driving 3 hours for $50.
Right.
In a hoopty.
Mm,
So you
man.
just never know when that's going to turn into a complete and utter deficit, right?
Right.
Uh,
You're keeping the economy, the poetry economy, really alive. Because I mean, there it
listen,
doesn't sound like there is one.
not really. I mean, and
No.
look, cats are still out here paying like 1995 prices for poets, right? Like,
Yeah.
no poet should be reading for like $50 right now. So like that's
No.
old school prices.
Mhm.
So, but it's I always kind of bring it back to money, but it's really not about the money. It's about
No.
the value.
Right.
The money represents respect, it represents value, it represents lots of things that have nothing to do with money.
Mhm. Indeed. So, all right, let's talk about you being like this national and local critic. And I know that this is like dynamic wise, people come to you and they're like, let's get the hot take, right? Like, let's get this hot take, let's get that. And I know that could probably put you in positions that are undesirable when you're a truth teller, right? And you're telling the truth and this is really happening. And like, it would seem like, in my experience, people aren't really listening. If they're listening, they're not doing as much about it. So, from this antagonist perspective, how is that taxing? Like, do you enjoy it? Is it adrenaline giving? I don't know. Like, how is that for you? I don't know. Like, how is that for you?
It depends on what I'm criticizing,
Mm,
right? So, criticizing somebody's movie is very different than criticizing City Hall,
yeah.
or
Yeah.
criticizing or the police,
Mhm.
right? Or the mayor. And then you end up in the room with the mayor like a month later. Like that's very different than I really didn't like this record. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? So, um, but generally speaking, we're all critical.
Mhm.
I'm just very visible with the criticism, right? And I need to be, right? Like that's my activism. That's part of
Mhm.
my activism, right? Is to let people know what they're not seeing in a thing or what they should consider about a thing. This is, and when it comes to like just doing like random culture things, that really costs me nothing
Mhm.
in terms of energy, in terms of bandwidth, whatever. And I used to write very long things about culture, but now not so much, like movies and music and whatever.
Mhm.
I spend that energy on things that frankly are more important. Like my city and
Mhm.
how my city treats people and how people do or don't interrogate where they live. This is something you alluded to in the question.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of times I think that people, what's interesting is you kind of describe it as people come to you for the hot take,
Mhm.
which actually, that kind of used to happen a lot more than it does now. You would think
Mhm.
it would happen a lot now because I'm more well known now, but
Mhm.
not so much. But I think that's because people expect it.
Okay.
And they had this expectation, oh, Scott's gonna say something about it, and then I
Mhm.
don't, right? Like I'm in a different season right now, even with my criticism.
Mhm.
Because the one thing I really hate doing is repeating myself. I despise it. And so if I wrote it and it's public, it's out. All you have to do is either be a good follower or find it. And I have no problem pointing people in that direction, but I already wrote the thing, right? I probably wrote it 2, 3, 4 times about the thing and added a different angle each time.
Mhm.
And so, frankly, that was taxing, right? Doing weekly columns, at least half of which were critical of my city.
Mhm.
And I say my city very pointedly because it's mine.
Mhm.
It's mine. I live here. I've grown here. I was
Mhm.
raised here. Um, I paid taxes here since I was like 18 years old or whatever. So,
Mhm.
this is my city. If I get to say whatever I want about this city, because it comes from a place of love, even when it doesn't love me back. That's really not important to me at this
Mhm.
stage in my life. It was important, not so much now.
Indeed.
But anyhow, but yeah, it takes a toll sometimes. But now I've learned to just you don't have to respond to everything.
Yes.
You know, you don't have to respond to everything. You shouldn't respond to everything,
Mhm.
right? Because what that does is it sets people up to just come to you, and then they just like what you wrote, and that's their activism.
Mhm. Yep.
And it's not. It's not. That's not even a vote. You know what I'm saying? That's just saying you like what I wrote. Maybe you like what I wrote.
Mhm.
So my goal with that kind of work is to activate people.
Mhm.
I don't want to be the only person out there. I get no ego benefit from being the only person saying XYZ on a given day about whatever Columbus is doing. That's not what it's about for me, right? Like I
Mhm.
want other people to be writing about it. I want other people to be talking about it. I want other people to be doing podcasts about it. I want other people to be activated because if something happens to me, then
Right.
what? Then what? Where's the hot takes now? What was the hot takes for?
Mhm.
Who that's not a goal.
Right, to be indisposable. You're like, nah. Because I think about
Not
like
really.
this notion that, I mean, to some degree, and like nobody can do that like you. And do they find the ways? Are they inspired to do it in the ways that are generative and good for them in the community, right? To inspire action. And I'm thinking about like this macro thought of you know whether it be racism, poverty, disparities in health, and anti-blackness, all of these things as things that in our lifetime, I don't believe there will be a solve for, right? Um, what is so your goal is to activate folks, but like, what are your other visions for our community as we move through like generation 4 or 5 of the seeds of slavery sprouting, and like existing? Like, what is your vision for community and being in community? Is it like a microcosm in the streetlight guild? Like I could see that right in that space. But what's your vision for that in a space where it's like on a macro level? I don't know if there will ever be unity or solves for those really, really big problems that we continue to see the effects of.
So you answered it part ways, right? Streetlight Guild is it's like my laboratory for revolution, right?
Hmm.
Where can you go and be free to
Hmm.
create, to think, to talk, to be? That space is like truth serum, right? Like no
Hmm.
lies can be spoken in that space.
Hmm.
And I don't set it up. There's no sign that says that. It's just when you enter it, you are entering a space that shouldn't exist,
Mm.
right? Like even the way that that space was created is like fairy tale. Like that should not happen. And it doesn't. It doesn't happen that way. It hasn't happened that way, to my knowledge, in this city since, not for any Black person. And so that space commands uh, honesty, right? It commands realness. And if your realness is foul, then that will will out, right?
Mhm.
But generally speaking, that space is kind of an example of that, right? But on top of that, outside of that, beside that, bigger than that, in terms of a vision for what that might look like, I mean, I'm a pessimist. Let's be clear about this. Okay. So despite all the things that I do, like I'm ultimately still a pessimist. And Columbus makes it very easy to be a pessimist. And so when when I think about what could, what to me the goal is just to find your people.
Mhm.
I think that if you're out here kind of on your own, running your hustle, whatever that looks like for you, you really should adjust your lens and you should seek out your people.
Mhm.
Um, and that means the people who share your values, the people who want to do the things that you want to do, at least some of them. It doesn't have to be across the board, right? But find your people. And when you do, you will know you found your people when your work changes,
Mhm.
when your work becomes about people and not about yourself, when your work becomes about the future and not your past, when your work becomes more than what you can know, it becomes something beyond what you know. The best example of this that I can give you is Black Hodes, right? The
Mhm.
concert that I produced last October with Mark Lomax, Dr. Mark Lomax.
Mhm.
And we I was, if I have time to tell this story.
Yeah.
Um thank you. Um I was invited to produce a concert by the John Stone Fund for New Music, right? I'd done lots of work with them and they were like, look, we're looking to do this thing for maybe 3 years, do one of these things a year, something like that. Are you interested in producing that? Of course.
Yeah.
And so my first idea was Black Odes. It didn't have to be overwhelmingly Black. It didn't have to be a lot of things. It could be anything I wanted it to be. And so the challenge, and it was a challenge, I would tell you, like real work challenge, was to try to create something that was the blackest thing that I could conceive of, but that had zero pain,
Mm,
right? Zero baggage, zero um, like references to slavery or to the police or any of that. Like,
hmm.
what are we without those things and still be where we are?
Yeah.
Where is the beauty in everything that we do now?
Hmm.
What is our culture when it is when it liberty, right? If someone could wave a magic wand and give us freedom and liberty from all the things that afflict us, what kind of black people would we be? And so that's where we started creating Black Odes. I didn't write one sentence of a poem, and Mark didn't write one note of music, and Duart did not run one brush stroke of paint um, without going through that process every time we approached it,
Hmm.
right? It's not just, oh, what does Black joy look like? That's not exactly what Black Odes was. Black Odes was deeper than that.
Hmm.
Which is why people respond to it the way that they do, which is why they cry, which is why they applaud like they're in church. There's a reason why that thing works the way that it does, and it's because of the place that we come from to create it. And so when you ask me about what could I see, for our community or communities at large, or all of our intersecting communities that make up who we are as a person,
Hmm.
I would want that, right? I would want a true and genuine deep dive into oneself for the person that they are
Mm,
without scars, right? Which is the shortest way I can describe that process. I would want that, and you can't do that unless you find your people, right?
hmm.
When I went to go do that project, I already knew my people. I knew Mark. I knew Duart. I knew what they would bring. I knew what they were capable of, and I knew that hitting them with this challenge would be daunting because all of us spend a lot of our time talking about what's wrong with the world.
Hmm.
And that exercise completely demanded that we not do that, like very pointedly over a long period of time, not do that and then create.
Hmm.
I want that for everybody. I want everybody to do that kind of interrogation, that kind of deep dive and see what comes out, and see what comes out. I want everybody to seek their most honest selves.
I love that framing because I've been kind of wrestling with this notion of thriver's guilt. Um, I kind of came up with it from the idea of survivor's guilt, but when you're starting to hit your stride and thrive, right? And feeling like, what are we? What are we without the struggle, the pain, the disparity? Like, who are we without that? And like, not uh, being a victim apologist, or not, like, not dismissing the truth in that, but also like acknowledging that it's okay to thrive, right? And that reframe is actually a really beautiful way. And of course, I'll quote you, but I'm gonna take it around the
Please
notion of like,
do.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. We'll spread that out. But like, who are you without? Because I think there is a time to sit in the victim space and like wallow. I always like talk about wallowing in the moat. Like, I need to wallow in this moment, right? Like, I'm impacted and I need to talk about it and I need to be here and I need to stay here. But I'm gonna get up in a minute. Like that, I'm gonna cry for a little bit and then I'm gonna get up and go do something about it, right?
Mhm.
But it's like, how do we, as much as we can possibly do, start there, and move accordingly. And that's not to say you're not going to get the woes of life, but like, what does it mean to really start from there? So I really, really love that framework. So that's a beautiful example. Thank you for bringing that into the space.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll just add, like, it's not like you're divorcing yourself from your reality. Like the world will remind you real quick of your reality,
Hmm.
right? if you care, right? Like if you care about Black people, if you care about community, if you care about, intersectionality, and if you're, and if you carry empathy for people, like the world will remind you that that is not how it is wired.
Yeah.
Right. So I never worry about if I'm um, being too happy, right? Or if I'm getting too many wins, right?
Hmm.
Because the world lets me know all the time, right? Like because I care about the world and people,
Hmm.
I'm reminded all the time. Something bad is happening all the time, right here, right? I don't
Hmm.
mean around the world. I mean right here.
Hmm.
And so it's never too long lived, right? If you care. If you don't care and you live in a bubble, that's different,
Right.
right? Like I saw some brother online the other day. He was like, I don't know why everybody's complaining about Columbus. Columbus is great. Things are developing, this, and that. And like, it's an amazing place. I'm just like, yo, that bubble you in is dope, right? Your bubble is awesome.
Like
But
we're on Rachel Maddow like twice in 2 months, and you're like, this place is awesome.
yeah, and it's like, bruh, like if that's your bubble, then cool. But understand that your bubble is not the world. Your bubble is not even this city.
Hmm.
And so if you go through life in this place and that is your only real takeaway,
Hmm.
then you are not exhibiting empathy. You are not exhibiting an awareness, a necessary awareness to be a good citizen,
Right.
right? Like most of what I do and write about and plan around when it comes to Columbus and Columbus culture and Columbus politics or whatever, that is about making people better citizens, regardless of what they are. I just need you to be better informed, better behaved, better everything, right? Like I
Hmm.
just need you to be a better, like I need you to care about being a better citizen. And you
Hmm.
cannot do that if you remove the criticism,
Hmm.
if you disown the criticism. You that doesn't make you a good citizen. That means you like your bubble and you don't want nobody to burst your bubble.
Indeed. Well, that is a good end note for that. Um, but I do want to turn the table a little bit and give you the opportunity. And this could be from any lens. This could be from a producer lens, an artist lens, a professional lens, um, random musing or curiosity. But this is, we call the situational hot seat. So you ask me questions, questions, follow-up questions about a situation or something you're just thinking about how I'm looking at it. And we get to hear the flip. So
Cool.
go.
I'm ready. So, uh, why do you not do your art more?
Um,
It's a trick question because you have several arts.
yeah, I would say that I would challenge that um to say that I do a lot of my art. And in a lot of the places that I'm in, so let's see, what was it? Just last weekend, I got to spend some time with Black Girls Rising and do some vision boards. And I also had 2 weeks ago an improv show. I'm in a couple improv troupes. Um, Black Friday and Illuminati. We love wordplay. But I'm in those and like I'll do poetry, improv poetry at the end, summarizing the entire show, right? Or I have a book that I get to put together that is the trilogy of Grounded, Fire, and now it'll be called Flow, right? So that's the next book that'll come. And when I did my first book launch, and then I did my last one in April of last year at the Lincoln Theater Ballroom, um, my production is going to stay at I may sponsor and work with Camille or something like that to sponsor the Ohio Rest Collective. You'll see us sponsor little things here and there, Double Dutch and Brunch, those types of things. But as far as producing like my own show, like the lift that is for me, because of the way that I communicate and because of the level of expectations that I have, and the way that I do things. And I just got recently, last year, a autism and ADHD diagnosis. It is really, really taxing for me. Um, to put all those pieces to the puzzle together, and I already have a team now. Like, I have Anthony, my guitarist, normally Patience singing with me, probably Monique, and I got my squad together. Like, I know who I'm gonna call on. Katie Forbes is doing film, but I had 20 minutes of my show that was pictures of just the protest in Columbus, and it went from, like, you know pain to, like, the joy and the youth, right? And then there were dancers, like African dancers and a drummer and all the organizers from the community that I'm connected to. I had them come in and experience that, and, like, it was a big production. So for me, I think the reason why I don't produce, which would be the only way I would agree with that statement that I don't do my art, the reason that I don't
Or
produce is because of the taxing nature of that. But I do get to, in really cool ways, I'm kind of like nuanced in that because, like you said, I talk to people that you don't talk to, right? Like, I am doing Amy Turn Sharp show on her Donato stage next week. And so I get to do some quirky things that people probably, like, I don't see, and I don't always post everything. Um, and so for me, because even if I do, people are like, "Oh, you do so much. You're so busy. Like, I don't know." And then I started doing an email that I would, like, I'm looking at this book right now. I have a chapter in this book. Like, I forget about it sometimes because, like, sometimes I don't move it's an organizational management book. So I mean, I'm doing a lot of creating, and the shares I'm saying no a lot more, based on my capacity. I have a really, really cool day job, if you will. Leadership Columbus, it was really cool, and I got to do a lot of behind the scenes curation. The older I get, the more introverted I get. I would call myself an ambivert. So, like, I do get energized by being with people, but I also need that restoration time and recovery time. And so for me, it's like, what do I want to do? What do I want to say yes to? What do I have capacity for? I don't really half-ass do anything. And I think my art has shifted over time where I want to be in that space more of creating from joy as opposed to, I mean, and I write to heal, you know what I mean? So I think a lot of times I haven't done as much writing because I'm actively healing and okay. So, like, now I'm more in the comedy space because more shit's funny right now. And that's how I choose to deal with it. But I'm
facts.
always down to, like, collaborate, and I feel like my hands are in different things and my role has kind of shifted in some of those things where I'm not always like the marquee or, like, out in front because ultimately I just don't have capacity. Like, I travel. I just started this job probably about 90 days ago. And out of the 12 weeks, I've traveled 8 of them. And I work for a very big time brand. Like, we have really big brand recognition. And that transition alone has caused me to, like, pause a lot of the things that I was doing because I really wanted to invest and learn the culture. But I also get to do it's rare that in a corporate space you get to do, like, community engagement, community building, philanthropy, and to some level, like, intersectional sourcing for talent pipelines. That's rare. So, like, I'm trying to, be present there. So I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm not doing as much art. I maybe not be putting myself out there in the sense that, like, I'm open for business, but I never have done this for the money. I've always done it for an outlet. I had a moment in ninth grade where I had to choose between being Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream and the starting point guard for my varsity basketball team. And that is really when the choices started to begin around where I was going to place my energy and my attention, intention, and presence. And so I'm actually really happy with where I'm at right now, and I love watching my friends do the thing, and I'll go to shows and I'll sit. And when people ask me to do stuff, depending on who it is, I'll be like, yeah or nah. And I sleep really well. I go to bed pretty much before 10 every night, and I don't normally talk to people before 11 a.m. It's really fantastic. So I've adjusted in that way, but that's what I would say about me and my art.
Okay. You understand why an external impression might be that you don't do it as much, though, right?
Yeah, I don't.
Oh, you don't
I
understand why
don't.
that would be true?
I do understand why that would be the perception,
Yes.
because the lean has also been to the professional element as well for me. And I I believe it was you, and it might have been a couple years ago where you just were like, I mean, you only have so many jars, you know what I mean? Like you only have so much to pull from. And I have really found uh my love and my joy for community. It really started when I was at Kaleidoscope, where I got to combine my like intellectual and technical skill with the community. And so since then, it's like if there's a gap or there's a need to fill, that gets filled with my work. And I think that's really wonderful. But I also am not interested in overextending myself.
Yeah.
So I mean some choices get made, but like in terms of a catalog, like I'm pretty cool with what's out there now. Like
Good.
some links, some books,
Well,
shows,
and to
you
be
know.
clear, I am not criticizing where you are, to be
I don't
clear.
believe you are.
No. I think it sounds like, you've got balance, or at
Hmm.
least you're very close.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, speaking as someone who has horrible balance still, right? Like my life is nothing but a struggle for balance at this point, right? Like
My wife
I
would
am
say I'm still struggling.
sure. Like I am sprinting to November, right? Like
Hmm.
I've blocked out November and December like entirely from
Hmm.
everything. And so as much as I want to see 30 poets, I can't wait till they're done.
Can't wait to
you
see your
know, it's,
eyelids more.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And look, I mean, like even putting your wins out there is like
Hmm.
work.
Hmm.
It generates work, like all of that snowballs,
Hmm.
which is why, like when I tell people like, yo, you don't have to say yes to everything, right? Like, trust me, if you're doing any level of work, something will be attracted to it,
Hmm.
and so just wait, it'll come. And, depending on how often you do that, then yeah, the snowball could get very large very quick.
Well, I
Um,
mean, recently, like for me, I started, and I say coaches should have coaches, right? So I'm big in the leadership development space, personally and collectively. And so I had a coach that I was working with on some like social media, kind of like that was the original discussion. But then we were like, all right, let's see what you really want to do. And I was like, that's when I started, Culture View. And that was really a platform. And so the podcast does exist on that, but like started a Patreon, which I have neglected significantly. But like started a Patreon. I was like, I'm gonna start a Patreon, I'm gonna start this podcast, and I'm gonna do all this. And like, I don't know what other people measure it in success, but I feel like this podcast has been really awesome. Like I've enjoyed it. I think I'll be able to look back on it as a body of work in some years and just be really proud of it in terms of Columbus, which I'm not a native of Columbus, but like it's again, now at this point, my city too. Like, so I'm like, I love this city and I love the people in it. And so that's a body of work that has taken my attention to some degree. And it's a different form of art, but I'm like, okay, so like there's all this stuff. And, even just like posting, and I know there are like automated things like that, but I just can't get into the automated posting stuff. Like
yeah,
every post you get from me is either going to be maybe copied from another social media site at most. Like you're not going to see me doing a lot of automated posting, right? So like everything is about platform, and then you have like impact, and those are important to me. I remember talking with Juggle after I talked to him after the nest, and we
Yeah.
had talked about, because then there was this opening, right? There's this gap for it. And me and Barbara Fant talked about it a little bit too. Because I think, probably a few years after that, she created uh the Black Women's Poetry Collective.
Mhm.
Um, but like I thought about doing it, and then I was like, that would wear me out. And like after talking to Camille, I think maybe last week or the week before that, and like seeing all that she's doing and all the production, and just quite frankly, the fuckery that she has to experience and some of that, I'm like, I'm glad I didn't.
Mm,
You know what I mean? Because I mean, yes, people are interested in performing and doing all this, but there's a certain level of uh I think we lost a level of social emotional wellness and connectedness. And we weren't doing that great. And then COVID came along and it just like blew all that up. Right. So there's a certain level of uh emotional maturity where it's like, all right, am I gonna do a workshop on resting your nervous system and regulating your nervous system? Or am I just gonna do a show? Like what's gonna have the most lasting and sustainable impact? So like if I have a choice on a Saturday, I'm probably going to do that workshop about regulating your nervous system,
mhm.
um, and go home and go to bed by 8 o'clock on a Saturday night. You know what I mean? Then like go out. Like that's going to be my choice at 41. Like that's going to be my choice because I think like there are people that sometimes are still talking about workshops that we've done with the Ohio Rest Collective or just me where it was just like we talked about finding your voice or something like that. Those are the things where it's like I've kind of leaned into like that business element as well as being like a mentor and a coach for some people about how to get your business ducks in a row because we don't have a ton of that access. I mean, we have the Lincoln Theater incubation program, but we don't have a ton of things in place that like tell you how to be about your business, which I think is why, like even when listening to Camille talk about how much you've been a mentor, like, whether you knew it or not, we're watching you and people don't know how to be about their business and business people. Like we get taught to be in community, we don't get taught to be in business. So there are opportunities for me in different ways to flex in different ways and support the community. And so that's what I'm interested in depending on what's going on at the time. Like there's already art, like, like I don't
Mhm.
feel that tug sometimes to be like, oh, my art needs to be in this room right now. There's enough in this room. I'm okay right now.
Oh, that's I hate to hear you say that
I mean, I know, but I'm still gonna create. Like that's just not gonna not happen.
for 2
But
reasons. 1,
say it.
because there's never enough art, and
Mm,
2, because the art that you do is so good, and so, frankly, there's always room for more good art,
you
right?
right. You right.
I
You
will
right.
kill
That's
2
probably what I
black
tell
poets to
myself.
get 1 of you
Please
today.
don't kill them.
Murder. Because there's not enough. Then let's just be clear about that,
Okay, you're right. I probably just tell myself that so I feel better about not doing as much art.
right? Look, whatever you got to do to get in bed by 8 o'clock, let me tell you, I am
I'm
not.
telling you. This has moved up from like 10 p.m. to like now we're at like 8 p.m., which is aspirational, but not accurate.
Yes, yes,
Well, what this
yes.
tells me is I get to get this book together and yeah,
Yeah.
run it back. So yeah, I get to put this book together. It's mostly written. I get to, create this got deep. I get to create, all the connections and make it shake. And I am continuing to do this podcast, but I'm in a space right now, I think of like a probably like a arty pause, really with that first 90 days of the new job and the magnitude of it, just kind of like pausing, but nothing like a Scott Woods pep talk, to like get it going.
That's why I created TikTok. I got my TikTok just for the express purpose of telling random people what to do. So
I think I
I'm
wish there
writing
was
now.
a element of it where I think the anticipation or like the persona that I have in the community is that I'm this like super compassionate, grounded person. And I'm like, yeah, I am. And I like am a human with initial reactions. So I've always kind of oscillated between wanting a platform that is like educational and inspirational and wanting a shit talking platform. I really want a shit talking posting platform. I have to figure out when that can be, especially with this new job.
Yeah, yeah. Like that's what my podcast is, right? Like we
Okay.
only post the podcast like maybe like once every like 3 or 4 or 5 months. But then like it's like an hour, hour and a half of us just talking exactly how we talk, right? And then I'm good for a little while, right? I'm good
Mm,
for a little while.
okay,
So
maybe I should come on a podcast. Like, shit talk on your podcast. Just kidding. I'll make some X posts on the X Twitter.
yes, where you have parameters and limits,
And like, text messages work too and voice
Mm,
memos. They're great. Fun
yes.
rants.
If
Yes.
I'm completely honest, I have allowed myself to have like one coffee meeting a month for that purpose.
You gotta have the friends. Your people also are people that can hold all of your stuff, not just a grounded, reasonable, strategic, rehearsed individual. You need those people that you can go off the rails with that'll either call you in or, dance in the rain with you.
I think miners, my folks are generally of the C variety. They just laugh. They just laugh at me all the time. So apparently, the angrier I get, the funnier I get. I don't know.
That's
So
what I've heard. I've been compared to Jack Jack. So I mean, that feels
yeah,
that feels dismissive to some degree because I'm like, I'm grown, you know what I'm saying? Like I have
eh,
real feelings. I'm really angry, scary,
yeah, yeah.
but nah,
Mhm.
not so much.
Well, every once in a while, I think you have to go to a poetry open mic and you have to throw a drunk out like physically, and then people will understand that the anger is not all jokes, right?
Like I'll
Like
beat your
that's
ass, actually.
yeah, like my open mic was great for that on occasion, right? Like I think I threw people out like 2 or 3 times,
Yeah, it
and
was
they would be
past my
like, "What?"
bedtime, but I would
Yeah,
always
no,
like
for
look for the
real.
next
Yeah.
day show, like
Hmm.
the next post the next day, and I'd be like,
Hmm.
"What happened?
Yeah.
Tell me."
No, it was past my bedtime too. That's why people was getting thrown out.
And you just wanted some wings, so it's like, quit playing with me.
Yes, if you're drunk and I'm hungry, you're getting thrown out. That's just how it goes.
Get out,
Like physically.
heckler. Amazing. Well, this has been wonderful, and I'm sure we could, now that we're in the shit talking portion of the podcast, do this for a while. But I obviously have a bedtime, so thank you so much for your time, for your contributions to the community. Of course, I know we don't ever have to ask you, and we might not ever have to thank you, but I want you to know it matters. I'm watching. I am grateful for you. You were one of the first people here to embrace my art and embrace me as an individual and a friend. Hopefully, we'll talk more. But thank you so much.
No, it's my pleasure and anytime.